that role that everybody knows, that myself and my wife wished to carry on, but was stopped from being able to do that.
The announcement did not arrive with ceremony, warning, or mercy. It came through a sealed palace decree carrying two punishments powerful enough to divide a family and stun an entire nation. Harry would no longer hold the title of prince, and Meghan would be permanently barred from entering British soil. With one signature, the monarchy had transformed a private family war into an irreversible act of royal exile. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles signed the final order, after years of warnings, failed meetings, and attempts to stop the conflict. The decree, a formal written command carrying the authority of the crown, offered no pause, appeal, or further talks. It removed Harry's birth title and permanently banned Meghan from entering the United Kingdom. This was not pressure, it was closure, written in language cold enough to make the king hesitate before setting down his pen. Harry received the document alone in California. He read quickly, searching for conditions he could challenge, until his eyes reached the sentence declaring that he would no longer be Prince Harry. His hand froze. Then he read the line again, and again. The title had followed him through childhood, loss, military service, marriage, rebellion, and exile. Now the palace had cut it away in one paragraph, leaving him staring at words that felt like erasure. Meghan stood across the room, silent, until the summary reached the restriction on British soil. Her expression hardened, but the anger did not last. The ban was indefinite. No family visit, private appearance, or ceremony could happen unless the order was reversed. She lowered the page, realizing Britain had not merely rejected her royal role, it had closed the country to her completely. Then Harry found the hidden threat. A confidential clause stated that any public challenge would authorize the release of sealed palace correspondence, documenting years of failed negotiations. Those letters could expose every offer, refusal, warning, and broken promise. Charles had not announced the decision himself. Instead, William had been ordered to oversee enforcement, placing the future king at the center of a rupture that could destroy what remained between the brothers. One detail cut through Harry's shock. A date appeared in the appendix beside the phrase, "Final breach of trust." It pointed to a private ceremony at Windsor, a night the palace had never explained and the family had never openly discussed. But the decree could not be understood through titles and borders alone, because behind every line of punishment stood 4 people carrying wounds the palace had failed to heal. Before the monarchy became an institution of signatures and sealed orders, it was a family that had already lost the ability to speak without causing pain. Charles faced the son he could no longer protect. William carried the burden of defending a crown he had not yet inherited. Harry felt abandoned by the people who once defined his world, and Meghan confronted the terrifying permanence of becoming an exile. Charles remained alone in his private study after the decree had left his hands. He removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers against the page, and held them there as though the decision might still move beneath his touch. The crown, the institution representing the monarch's authority, duties, and continuity, demanded certainty from him, but fatherhood offered none. He had removed an identity Harry had carried since birth, and no legal wording could hide what that meant. William felt the same wound from the opposite side. He believed every failed meeting, leaked conversation, and public accusation had weakened the monarchy's ability to protect itself. Yet enforcing the order meant becoming the person who closed the door on his own brother. The future king had spent years preparing to defend the institution, but no preparation had taught him how to do it without losing part of his family. Harry called before the silence could settle. Charles answered, but neither man began with anger. The younger son asked only one question, and his voice broke before he finished it. Did his father still consider him a son? even if the crown no longer considered him a prince? The king paused too long. When he finally answered yes, the word sounded painfully small against everything the decree had taken away. The call ended in under 2 minutes. Meghan discovered an even harsher truth in the final pages. The restriction did not apply only to royal estates, official ceremonies, or palace events. It prevented her from entering Britain for private family occasions, unless the entire order was formally overturned. She read the clause twice, then looked toward Harry with a silence more frightening than anger. Weddings, funerals, private visits, and last goodbyes had all become impossible. William held one document that explained why the palace had gone so far. It was a confidential record of an earlier private exchange, offering Harry a limited route back into royal cooperation. The arrangement allowed controlled family contact and a carefully defined public role, but it carried an expiration date the Duke had never fully understood. That deadline had passed after a promise made before senior royals was broken. Charles knew that promise had changed everything. William knew it too. Harry had only just begun to understand that the decree was not born in the present, but in one night the family had buried beneath years of silence. And when the palace looked backward for the moment reconciliation truly died, every account returned to the same closed room at Windsor. The final decree did not begin with a television interview, a memoir, or a public accusation. Its true beginning was hidden inside Windsor Castle, during a private family ceremony where Harry made a promise directly to Charles, William, and the late Queen's senior household representatives. What followed that night was remembered inside the palace not as another disagreement, but as the precise moment trust collapsed beyond repair. Harry entered the gathering, believing it was a final chance to rebuild what years of anger had damaged. The reconciliation ceremony, a private meeting designed to repair relations and set clear rules for future contact, offered him continued use of his prince title, limited access to royal residences, and a careful path back toward Charles and William. The offer mattered because it protected both his public identity and his personal connection to the family. Charles spoke without anger, but the weight in his voice made the room feel smaller. He asked his younger son to promise that nothing said inside that room would ever appear in a commercial project, interview, publication, or public dispute. The king was not asking for silence to protect pride. He was trying to create one place where father and son could speak, without fearing that grief would later become content. Harry placed his hand on the closed agreement and gave his word. He said the conversation would remain private. William watched from across the table, wanting to believe him but unable to release the doubt built through years of broken contact. The future king said nothing, yet his silence carried a warning. This was the last chance, not another beginning. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Palace lawyers received the draft transcript of a planned streaming documentary after a production assistant sent it to the wrong legal address. The documented account contained phrases from the Windsor meeting, word for word, including Charles's private plea and William's warning about trust. Those details had never appeared in public, and only the people inside that room could have known them. Meghan's name appeared beside the most damaging passage. The draft attributed to her the claim that the meeting proved the monarchy feared their public influence and wanted to control their voice. That sentence turned a private peace effort into material for a commercial production. Harry had promised protection. Now the palace held evidence that the promise had not survived even 1 month. Charles read the transcript alone and ordered it sealed rather than released. He still hoped to prevent total collapse. William reacted differently. He told his father that silence would only delay the same betrayal, and he insisted on one final meeting before the crown decided whether his brother's title could survive. That confrontation would bring the brothers face to face without cameras, advisors, or excuses, and only one of them would leave, believing the family could still be saved. William entered the room carrying no official folder, and wearing no ceremonial authority. Harry was already waiting, standing beside the fireplace with his arms folded and years of resentment visible in his silence. For the first time since the Windsor betrayal, there were no aides to soften the language, and no palace statement to control what followed. Two brothers faced each other, and the crown stood invisibly between them. William closed the door and remained standing for a moment. Charles had authorized this final attempt because the king still wanted a choice that did not end in permanent removal. Clarence House, the monarch's London residence and working base, had become the setting for a family decision disguised as a formal negotiation. The future king placed a short agreement on the table and told Harry there was still one path left. Harry could keep his title if he signed a permanent confidentiality agreement and publicly admitted that the Windsor material should never have entered production. The document would stop private family conversations from being used in interviews, books, documentaries, or commercial disputes. William kept his voice controlled, but every sentence carried exhaustion. He was not offering forgiveness. He was offering survival. Harry rejected the accusation immediately. He insisted that Meghan's production team had received the material through staff, and that he had never approved the exact wording found in the transcript. His anger sharpened as he argued that the palace had already decided to blame them before hearing the full account. Meghan, he said, had not entered that Windsor room and could not be held responsible for every action taken around the project. William moved his chair closer. He told his brother that responsibility could not be separated from consequence, especially when trust had already been damaged. The prince said every private conversation now felt like future content rather than family truth. Harry heard condemnation in those words. William heard one final warning being ignored. Harry rose so quickly that the chair shifted behind him. He demanded to know whether William had entered the room as his brother or as the future king. The answer came quietly, without hesitation. "I came as both, and you have made both impossible." William then revealed what Charles had prepared. Two versions of the decree already existed. One preserved Harry's title under strict conditions. The other removed it permanently. The king had delayed choosing between them because he wanted this meeting to decide whether trust could still be rebuilt. Harry stared at the agreement, then pushed it back across the table. He would not sign. William did not argue again. He stood, collected nothing, and left his brother alone with the consequences of that refusal. But the decision no longer belonged only to Charles or William. A hidden constitutional group had already begun shaping the Crown's response, and its members were prepared to push royal power further than either brother expected. While the brothers' last conversation collapsed behind closed doors, another room was quietly deciding how far royal power could be pushed. The public would see Charles's signature, but the decision had been built by a smaller and far more disciplined circle. Senior advisors, constitutional lawyers, security officials, and William gathered around a polished table where every word carried consequences beyond one family. Yet at the head of that machinery sat a father, who understood that the crown could survive scandal more easily than it could survive appearing powerless. Charles listened as the council separated the crisis into three dangers. Harry still used a royal title abroad, while attacking the institution attached to it. Private palace information had entered commercial productions, placing future conversations at risk. Meghan's access to Britain also created the possibility of unapproved appearances that could force the monarchy into another public confrontation. The Internal Council, a small group advising the sovereign on legal, security, and constitutional consequences, was no longer discussing family pain. It was measuring institutional survival. One advisor argued that removing the title alone would be little more than a symbol. Harry could still speak, publish, and appear publicly while presenting himself as a royal figure pushed aside by the palace. Another warned that Meghan's return to Britain could become a staged challenge, especially if cameras followed her near a royal location. The restriction, they said, would close that path completely. Charles remained silent until a lawyer referred to his younger son only by surname. The king lifted his head and interrupted him. "Use his name," he said. The room tightened at once. He knew the council had to study risk, but he would not allow legal language to strip away the fact that Harry was still his child. That distinction mattered, because the decision could protect the crown while breaking the father behind it. William spoke next. He argued that every previous act of mercy had been treated as weakness, and every private opening had become another source of pressure. The future king believed delay would only invite a larger crisis. Yet his voice tightened when he supported removing the title, because he understood he was asking Charles to take away something his brother had carried since birth. Then the security assessment changed the room. A documented briefing revealed that Meghan had planned an unannounced return to London for a filmed charitable appearance, despite clear palace warnings that no royal connection would be permitted. The event would have placed her in Britain, before cameras, while the family dispute remained unresolved. Charles finally accepted the combined measure. Harry would lose the title to protect royal authority. Meghan would be barred from entering Britain to prevent a public challenge on British soil. The council approved the recommendation, but no one mistook it for victory. The strategy appeared controlled inside the palace, but the moment the decree crossed the Atlantic, control vanished almost instantly. The first consequence was not a headline. It was a cancelled journey. Meghan had been preparing to return to London for a carefully planned appearance, when an official notice reached her legal team. Any attempt to board a flight bound for Britain would trigger immediate enforcement of the palace order. In that moment, exile stopped being ceremonial language. It became a border she could no longer cross. Meghan read the notice once, then again, searching for an exception that was not there. The entry restriction, a formal order preventing someone from legally entering the country, applied immediately and without a private family allowance. Within hours, organizers removed her name from the London program, deleted promotional material, and cut her recorded introduction. The event had been designed to prove that she could still command attention in Britain. Instead, her absence became the story. Harry received his own notice moments later. Palace officials would revise British records, ceremonial references, and future public documents to remove the designation of prince from his name. That change mattered, because it did more than alter formal styling. It cut away the title that had linked him to childhood, military duty, his mother's memory, and the family identity he had spent years resisting but never fully abandoned. Meghan closed her laptop and pushed her chair back. She said the palace had not merely rejected her former role, it had tried to erase her from Britain's future. Her anger filled the room, but the words carried fear beneath them. She could no longer return for a wedding, a funeral, or a private moment of family crisis without the order being formally reversed. Harry reacted differently. He blamed Charles for signing the decree and William for driving it forward. His voice rose until a revised family listing appeared on the screen before him. There was his name, stripped of the title that had once followed him beside Diana's. The anger left him. He stared at the line in silence, and for the first time, the punishment felt less like politics and more like loss. Their legal advisors delivered the final warning through a documented briefing. Any public challenge could activate the clause, allowing the palace to release sealed correspondence from earlier reconciliation attempts. Meghan urged her husband to fight anyway, arguing that silence would make the decree look justified. Harry feared the opposite. Another interview might prove the Crown's claim that every private effort eventually became public material. Harry finally refused the immediate strategy. He asked for a direct call with Charles, without lawyers, aides, or William listening. Meghan did not answer at once. The silence between them revealed the first crack in their united response. That decision created the first crack in the couple's united response and opened the door to one final conversation between a wounded son and an exhausted father. There were no secretaries taking notes and no lawyers listening from adjoining rooms. Charles answered the private call late in the evening, and for several seconds neither father nor son spoke. The silence carried everything the monarchy's statements had avoided: Diana's absence, years of bitterness, the brothers' collapse, and the unbearable truth that a title could be removed in one day, while the pain behind it had taken decades to grow. Harry spoke first. He said a public challenge would only deepen the conflict and could force the release of correspondence neither side truly wanted exposed. Charles agreed to continue on one condition: nothing from the call would appear in an interview, documentary, book, or private account shared with the press. The conversation itself became a final test of whether father and son could still exchange pain without turning it into a weapon. Harry admitted that losing the title felt like losing the last official connection to the boy he had been before Diana died. The prince title had never been only a rank to him. It linked his childhood to his mother, his military service to his family, and his past to a country that now seemed determined to reject him. His voice weakened as he said the decree had removed more than status. It had taken away the name through which Britain had known him. Charles listened without interruption. He finally said he understood more than his son believed. The king remembered the frightened boy behind the public figure, and the grief that had never fully left him. Yet sympathy could not erase what had happened. He confessed that signing the decree was the most painful act of his reign, but every earlier compromise had ended with another broken boundary. Harry asked whether the decision could still be withdrawn. Charles answered no. The monarch said the royal status was finished because the crown could no longer protect private trust while repeatedly fearing public exposure. But he offered one personal concession. His younger son would remain part of the family in private, would retain direct access to his father, and would never be treated by him as a stranger. Harry did not forgive him. The wound was too deep, and the punishment was too final. Still, he agreed not to launch an immediate interview or legal attack. That single decision prevented the sealed Windsor correspondence from being released, and spared both men another public humiliation. Charles ended the call knowing the family had not healed. Harry ended it knowing he had not been completely abandoned. Their restraint preserved a narrow private connection, but it could not stop what was coming next. The father and son ended their call without reconciliation, yet the world awakening outside would force both of them to confront what the decree now represented. By sunrise, the private decree belonged to the world. Television studios interrupted their schedules, newspaper presses ran through the night, and crowds gathered outside royal gates, searching for meaning in a decision few believed the palace would ever dare to make. Some saw discipline, others saw cruelty. But one image captured the national mood more powerfully than arguments, experts, or official statements ever could. British broadcasters framed the decision as the monarchy's harshest modern response to the immediate family of a serving king. The story was no longer treated as celebrity conflict. It had become a test of royal authority, family loyalty, and what Britain expected from the crown. Palace staff received instructions to use Harry's revised name immediately, while Meghan's official references were removed from royal engagements, patronages, and ceremonial records. A patronage, meaning an organization publicly supported by a royal figure, could no longer use her connection to strengthen its standing. William watched the coverage privately and felt no victory. Catherine noticed his expression change when an old photograph appeared beside the breaking headline, showing the brothers walking behind Diana's coffin. The future king reached for the remote and muted the television without speaking. She understood that the decree had protected the institution he would one day inherit, but it had also forced him to stand against the person who shared the darkest moment of his childhood. Meghan faced a different kind of pain in California. She listened as commentators debated whether she could ever attend another British wedding, funeral, or family ceremony. Harry remained beside her until one broadcaster described him as the king's son, but no longer Britain's prince. He left the room before the discussion continued. She called after him once, but he did not answer. Then the front page appeared. The London Chronicle showed an empty palace balcony beneath the headline, "The Missing Prince. Crown closes the door." Outside Buckingham Palace, members of a silent crowd held copies above their heads. The image turned an official decree into something painfully human, an empty space where a son and brother had once belonged. Windsor revealed the divide just as clearly. A small group placed flowers beside a handwritten card reading, "A family should not need a decree." Nearby, others applauded the palace for defending its boundaries after years of conflict. Britain had not reached one verdict. It had split between sympathy and approval. Charles watched that division grow, and knew silence could no longer protect him. He began preparing a final address that would decide whether history remembered the decree as revenge, necessity, or sacrifice. The crown had delivered its punishment, but only the king's final words could explain what had truly been lost, and what the monarchy believed it had saved. Charles did not speak as a victorious monarch. He spoke as a father who had accepted that duty could preserve an institution while permanently altering a family. The decree remained unchanged. Harry's prince title was gone, Meghan's return to Britain was forbidden, and the palace would not reopen negotiations. Yet beneath that finality stood a deeper verdict. This was not the crown defeating its enemies, but the monarchy surviving the people it could not reconcile. Charles confirmed that the order had been fully implemented and would not be reopened through private appeals, public pressure, or future ceremonial exceptions. The decree, a formal command carrying the authority of the monarch, had moved beyond argument and into permanent record. That mattered, because Harry was no longer facing a warning. He had lost the public identity, privileges, and institutional standing connected to being a British prince, even though his place in his father's personal history remained untouched. Charles folded the written address after the final sentence and stayed seated alone. The king felt no triumph. He understood that the crown had protected its authority, but the decision had destroyed the hope of a fully reunited family. Every rule he had defended now stood beside a personal absence he could not repair. Harry watched the speech without Meghan beside him. He reached for an old royal insignia resting on his desk, held it for several seconds, and remembered the life attached to it. The symbol had connected him to childhood, duty, loss, and home. He did not destroy it. Instead, he placed it inside a drawer, accepting that the past still belonged to him, even if the title no longer did. Meghan abandoned the planned legal challenge after receiving a final documented warning from her advisors. A public fight could expose sealed correspondence and push her husband even further from his father. She accepted that Britain was closed to her, not because the decision felt fair, but because continuing the battle would demand a price Harry was no longer willing to pay. William assumed responsibility for restoring confidence in the monarchy. The future king had strengthened the institution, yet he carried the knowledge that doing so had required him to stand against his own brother. Harry gained freedom from royal duty, but surrendered the identity connecting him to home. Meghan escaped palace control, but became permanently separated from Britain. Charles remained king, though more isolated as a father. The doors of the palace closed, the decree entered history, and the monarchy moved forward, not healed, not victorious, but certain that the crown would never again be placed above consequence or below survival.